found an incredible amount of weapons. For example, in Harput, they discovered 5,000 military rifles and revolvers held by the Armenians, especially the Diduknows. In Gurunkaza, 1,221 rifles and revolvers. In Kayseri, 400 military rifles, 1,200 revolvers. In Develi, 220 military rifles, and 45 revolvers. In Urfa, 720 military rifles, and many more, all over Anatolia. Stores of hundreds of bombs and sticks of dynamite were found in villages and towns. Caches of bombs and dynamite were even found in cities such as Izmit and Izmir. These are far from the Anatolian land that was claimed by the Armenian nationalists. But these bombs and dynamite were terror weapons. They had very limited military use. They were used to attack government buildings and especially to terrorize civilians. Armenian weapons were stored in houses, commercial buildings, buried in fields. They were stored in monasteries and churches, which the Ottomans previously had not been able to search. The Armenian rebels, once the war began, the Armenian rebels began to attack throughout eastern Anatolia. Innocent villagers and townspeople were murdered in large numbers. The rebels seized and briefly held cities such as Urfa, Shebin Karahisar, Marash, Bashkare. Most important, the rebels took the city of Van, the most important city in southeastern Anatolia. They seized most of the city, forcing Ottoman security forces into the citadel and destroying governmental buildings and Muslim homes. They held off the Ottoman army until they could be relieved by Russian invaders. For the Muslims, the loss of Van was not simply a loss of territory. Armenians, often aged by Cossacks, murdered and forced from their homes the Muslims of Van province, and it became obvious that the success of the rebels meant the death of the Kurds and the Muslims and the Turks. Armenians were instrumental in the Ottoman loss to the Russians. They acted as partisans, fighting behind the lines and aiding the Russian invaders. Armenian guerrilla bands operated throughout the east, cutting supply lines and telegraph lines. In the northeast, 1,000 soldiers were needed to patrol the telegraph lines in an attempt at restoring military communications. The soldiers were only partly successful. In the southeast, it was even worse. The soldiers were unable to restore communications. As soon as they replaced one line, Armenians cut another one. Ottoman garrisons in the southeast, in this region, Ottoman garrisons in the southeast were only able to communicate with the central command in Istanbul by sending messages by horse to Iraq, then on by telegraph to the capital. In other words, they had to send their messages through Baghdad and Damascus before they could reach Istanbul. Successful as they were in hampering the Ottoman war effort, the rebels tried to do much more. Had the British been more perceptive, the Armenians might have given them a great victory that would have considerably shortened the war. Armenian rebels tried to convince the British to invade by sea in Cilicia, where you see the Ottoman railroad lines and road lines come down to both Palestine and to Iraq. Had the British been more perceptive, they would have listened to the Armenians, because the only good roads and railroad lines went through Cilicia, the Chukurova region. The Ottomans had very few forces there. The Armenians offered up to 10,000 men to the British, and they actually began revolts in Zeytun, Marash area, and on Musadag. The Armenian plan was excellent, but the British did not listen to them. Instead, in one of the great mistakes of the war, they chose to invade at Gallipoli. The Ottomans, however, knew of the plan. They knew it was a very good plan. And because of it, the Ottomans were forced to put troops in the area. The troops had to be drawn from the Palestine front where they were fighting the British. The Armenians of Cilicia, now known to be a threat, were the first to be relocated. Every city that had to be taken from the Armenians, every Armenian band that had to be fought, every road that had to be cleared of guerrillas, these took soldiers. They took soldiers from what should have been their real task, fighting the Russians. The Ottomans lost the pivotal battle of Dilman. They lost the pivotal battle of Dilman, which would have altered the course of the war, because 6,000 troops were fighting the Armenians in the rear when they should have been at the front fighting the Russians. In short, the Ottomans had good reason to fear the Armenians. Then and now, military counterinsurgency doctrine demands that rebel guerrillas be isolated from local supporters. Local inhabitants would feed and hide guerrilla fighters. It would be impossible to defeat rebels if they could simply melt into the local population. The government, the Ottoman government, decided to remove the Armenian populace from the danger zones. But it is important to note that the Ottoman government did not transfer any Armenians until after the revolts had begun. And Armenians had greatly hindered the Ottoman army. The relocations were caused by revolts and the threat of revolts, not by any desire to kill Armenians. Maps of the real relocation of the Armenians. By no means were all the Ottoman Armenians transferred. In fact, when the real statistics of the relocations are studied, it is obvious that those who were transferred were those who were potential dangers to the war effort and potential dangers to the Muslim peoples. Those who were felt to be no danger remained in their homes. What? You can't hear me?
No, can't hear you.
But I'm so loud. Still not?
She can't hear you.
She can't hear me. Can you hear me now? No. But everyone here understands English, right? I only wish I could speak in German. But my German is so bad. What do I do? If you'd like, while we're waiting, I could do a short dance. What can you do? This is my tailor. He's fixing my clothes. The battery's dead. I believe it is an Armenian battery. In every speech, you should have a dramatic pause. Now? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes. Good.
Yes.
Okay, the trouble is, I forget where I was.
The real religion.
Ah. You can see on this map. When real relocation statistics appear, it's obvious that only the ones who were really a danger to the Ottomans, perceived to be a danger, were deported, I shouldn't say deported, were relocated. The Armenians of Istanbul, Izmir, Edirne, and most of Western Anatolia and Thrace were not relocated. They were not transferred. The propagandists have always stated that the Ottomans sent most or all of the Armenians to Zor. miserable places on the Euphrates River. This is not true. The majority of Armenians were not relocated, of course, but of those who were relocated, very few went to Zoar. Most went to northern Syria and to what today are Israel and Palestine. Many were sent from their homes to other parts of Anatolia where they would not be a threat. The Armenians left in their homes remained because they were not a danger. They lived in areas that were well controlled by the government. They remained because they were not a danger. In studying the transfer of the Armenians, one must avoid emotion-filled words such as deportation, which I just used a moment ago. These words cloud the truth. Demographers use the words forced migration, a technical term, but probably the best term. Forced migration is more inclusive, and that is important. It includes those who were transported in a more or less orderly fashion by the government, and those who fled for fear of their lives, whether or not there was a government order. The most important consideration is the suffering of the migrants. In the cold calculations of historical demography, what is important is how many fled and how many died. This map shows the major forced migration of peoples in the Middle East and the Balkans in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Quite a few. Forced migration of peoples was a sad reality for all the peoples of the Middle East and